Good afternoon to this session, and I hope that you are as well. Not least because infrastructure is what enables comfortable living, but more importantly, it is a catalyst for economic growth. And today we have very experienced speakers that will be speaking on this important topic. We have three speakers this afternoon. Mr. Brian Mukudzavu, who is an entrepreneur and CEO of Axis Solutions Africa based in Zimbabwe. We also have with us, I am sure some of you have met him earlier, Alex Densmore, who is the Chief Technical Officer of Batco Energy Storage in Cape Town. And we have Mr. Brian Muller, who is representing Mr. Uche Oji. Mr. Brian Muller is the head origination and structuring at Infrastructure Credit Guarantee Company that we all know as InfraCredit. So we have very experienced people in the area of infrastructure this afternoon. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch and you're ready to listen to them. To facilitate this afternoon session, can you please go to this site? It's called sli.do. Once you get in there, put in the code TKS19 and click on the on infrastructure, and you can put your questions for the speakers on there. At the end of all the presentations, we'll have a Q&A session.
My apologies. Technology at times just does let you down. One day I said to my son, let's go fishing. So we go there and I say, son, you'll be responsible for all the fishing gear. So we get at the site where we're supposed to do the fishing, and I go to the back of the car and I say, let me look for the fishing rods. I don't find any fishing rods. I come back and I say, son, but there are no fishing rods. And he says, yes, father, we are going to be doing wireless fishing. So that's the kind of generation that we deal with. So for me, the technology also today wasn't on my side. So good afternoon, and I bring you greetings from Zimbabwe, a country that has run out of cash. Nigeria still has got some cash. So I'll see how we can talk about that, right? So as we start talking about, I'm getting a feedback. As we start talking about infra, should I move back? I'm kind of getting, as we start, I think it's that speaker. I'm hearing myself speak. Hello? It's fine, okay. So, as we start talking about infrastructure, my presentation today is going to focus on the mothers. Infrastructure that is going to address the issues of the mothers. In the picture there, I've got a picture of an African woman. Did you know that in a lifetime, an African woman who is married will carry a weight, just in terms of firewood, that is more than 7 elephants. You just try to think the elephants being put on somebody's head, 7 elephants, that's what she will have. And every day, they walk at least 6 kilometers to go fetch water and then come back. Now try to think about 6 kilometers. In some instances, they actually do 13 kilometers. And if it is the girl child in our society, it's the girls who go and fetch water. How many hours is that in terms of productive time that is lost? Africans, we are said to be a working society. Right? We just walk. Right? So we walk 8 hours to go work for 2 hours and then come back and walk another 8 hours. That's what we do. And they also get to produce food. They are the ones who feed us, small-scale farmers. But how much do they get out of their produce? They get very little, if anything. I know in the cocoa industry, farmers actually out of the value chain only get 6%. The rest goes to, they can't even afford to eat the chocolate from the cocoa that they produced. Is that fair? Is that fair? It's not. And if she has a child, getting an ID for that child, some of the children will actually go without an ID. So you're somebody who cannot even be identified, because the ID gives you an identity. It enables you to go to school. It enables to go and open a bank account. They can't, because they don't have it. We take an ID for granted because we have got it. We have had to deal with a relative who comes to town and they say they want to look for a job and they don't have an ID. I had a situation where somebody was ill somewhere else and we had to get one of our relatives to go there. It was a different country. We couldn't even get the guy's passport because he didn't have any ID. That's what happens in Africa. The next thing, now that's the mother. Try to think about the child that she's going to bear. That child, chances of the child making it, the probability of that child making it beyond the age of 5 is less than 1. Is less than 1. So she's had all those problems, but she has got this child. If you look at the number of years that that child is expected to be in school, is just about 8 years. 8 years is up to, we start school at what age? At 6. Then after 8 years, how old will that child be? 14. And at 14 years, that child can no longer still go to school. If you are a girl child, what happens? Marriage, is it? So a 14-year-old, a baby having a baby because they did not get an opportunity to go to school, right? And these statistics that I'm giving you here, these are statistics that I'm looking at, which are for Nigeria. Food. Our children, stunted growth. Before I came to Nigeria, I always thought Nigerians were big. We're very big, right? Then I came here and I started seeing Nigerians who were not as big as I thought, right? Okay, I started seeing somebody who is as short as him. I was like, oh, so I can also be a Nigerian, right? But they've got stunted growth. Stunted growth later in life affects even performance in school. And we start saying, why are our African children not doing well? So there is no hope for the mother in terms of the load that she does, and also for the children that she's going to have. Is that the society that we want? We are all seated here. We've got cell phones in our pockets. They can't even afford to have that. But if we don't address these people who have got these problems, those are just some of the problems. But I just want to pause here and have a conversation. If you look at technology and the other spheres in terms of the society, what do those spheres look like? We said we want to be transformers, and we want to be in God's business. And God wants us to have life and have it what? In abundance. And we are also in the business of the word of the Father. But if you look at our society, how is the law here? What would you say in terms of justice? This one is an open question. What would you say about justice? Is it the best? No. How many can access it? Very few people, right? How many records go missing? A lot of records go missing. Right? How many times have judges been reassigned just before he passes a judgment? Lots of what? Lots of times. That's how our society is like. If you look at health, what is the status of our health? Horrible. That's why those children, by the age of 5, some of them cannot what? Cannot make it because of the status of our society. But if we don't address women, our society is looking at losing a potential of almost 140 billion. That's the kind of value that is in that we can unlock with women. So, is there a need for us to go and invest? Because some of you will be saying, no, why should we be worrying about the women? What's the size of the Nigerian economy? What's the size of the Nigerian economy? Huh? It's how much? About 400 and something. 5 billion. So you are letting go, yeah? 500 billion. So 500 billion. So you are letting go about a quarter of that, which is the potential that women have got. So if we were to address that, one of the key ways to address that and to enable those women is via technology. Most of the things that I said that our women face is got to do with the infrastructure, it has got to do with technology. And if we were to work on that, we would have addressed a key problem that our women have. So what is making women not access technology, which they can use for banking, which they can use to get birth certificate, which they can use even to complain and monitor what their legislators are doing? The challenge there is just an issue of affordability. They can't afford the technology. So we are talking about infrastructure. So we want to talk about infrastructure. Infrastructure for who? For people who can't afford it. We are talking about literacy rate. We are talking about the relevance of the content. When people go online, what do they go for? For WhatsApp and Facebook. Right? But how much of that is local content? There isn't a local content which they can use on a day-to-day basis. And the same women, there are some cultures where a woman is not allowed to own a phone. They're actually beaten for owning not just opening. There are times when women get beaten because she has opened my phone, she's asking for the password. So you beat her up, right? But this one is just for owning a cell phone. It's a real problem. Right? So, with that, you then have to start. What I've given you now is a real situation which I feel should have moved you. So what can you start to do which is about the Father's business? What has the Lord said to you in terms of the problem? So this problem that I've mentioned, I know some of you are starting to proffer some solutions. What are some of the solutions that you have started to think about that can help address these problems? But to do that, what we need to do when it comes to technology, they can't access it because it's expensive. Internet is expensive. They can't access it. So I'm going to talk more about how women can get to start to access technology. But the key thing is not just people building infrastructure. The infrastructure must be built to serve a purpose. Somebody is going to create a business case. So who are the people to build a business case for us to invest in infrastructure? Can I have some people here who say amen? Amen. Amen. Right. Because if you build a road and there's nothing to be carried, what happens? That road goes to what? To waste, right? So who are the people? So I'm going to talk more about how we can come up with a value proposition which will make it possible for us to invest in that infrastructure. I don't want the approach which says build it and they will come. They may not come. I've seen lots of infrastructure that has been built, but people never come. Because what's the reason? There's no business proposition. But in Nigeria, there's a unique one now. It's where lots of infrastructure is not finished. I've seen lots of infrastructure that is not finished. I don't know what actually happens. Is it that they get started, the money is not there, or the money is there, but and the money has been stolen? Just take it back a bit, right? So allow me take it back. Sorry, take it back. Take it back. Right, okay. Right, so next, yeah. So let's start now to talk about how we can make money. So I want to finish this so that I tell you areas in which we can make money so that we can go and vouch for a mobile base station to be put in your area or infrastructure to start, right? The first one is all about content, local content, right? Now, Nigeria, we know it as Nollywood, and everywhere, Nigerian movies, right? People like Nigerian movies. But I want you to do something. If you want to watch a Nigerian movie online, check the website that is listed there, copy that, go onto your computer, and do what is called trace route, right? Press enter, and you'll see where it goes. For you to watch a Nigerian movie produced on a cell phone at a low cost, actually the traffic goes first of all to America, and then it comes back. It's like going to Abuja, but first of all I go to America and then come back to Abuja. What does that involve? It's costly. Right? You want to look on your cell phone. If you are browsing a local website, do they charge you local? Is the data, are the data tariffs different? Huh? No. Right? In most instances, they charge you for internet browsing, but I'm browsing a local site just like I'm browsing a site that is outside. What about if we were to say that local traffic and everything is switched locally, there is nothing that goes out, and you start having a subscription for people who want to watch Nigerian movies, but the cost of going onto the internet is basically close to zero. That's the content that people want to do. People want to get onto the internet to check about agriculture, but they can't because they are charged what? Rates for something that they actually don't get to consume. So download speeds, you hear them, download speeds doing this. So can I get somebody in here who is going to tackle the regulator and the mobile network operator to say all traffic that originates from Nigeria must terminate in Nigeria? That's what you need to be doing. Huh? It's like somebody exports all the food out of Nigeria to South Africa and then imports it, right, and makes you start to buy Nigerian food. That doesn't work, right? So we look at content. You need to provide them with the proper content, right? The next thing is have value chains, and agribusiness is also quite a key thing, right? What value chains can you create? The problem why we've got rural people being poor is because nobody has come up with a value chain and recognized that those people in them have got quite a lot of potential. First thing, do you know how Gmail and Facebook is provided for free? Anyone, how do they make their money? How does Gmail or Facebook make money? Oh, go and do browse. Huh? With adverts, is it? Huh? So you give them your personal profile, everything about you. And in some instances, Gmail or Facebook knows more about you than your wife, right? But you give them, but that information is what they, so there is no one on the earth whom you can say is of no interest for somebody who can come up with a value proposition. Connect as many of those people who are in rural areas. There are organizations that are willing to pay for that information because they can push adverts to them. What about people who want to go and do and grow certain crops? They want to know which farmer, if I'm sitting here, which farmer has got this particular piece of land of this value. Connect them and you create value proposition. Rural people remain poor because we have not gone to them to show them the value of what they produce. Have you ever given anyone in the rural, so try this. Go to your rural areas with a pack of cornflakes. You know cornflakes? Yeah. And a bit of bacon. Sorry if there are any Muslims in here, right? Okay? So take a bit of bacon. Go and let them taste that. If they test that, once they finish testing, tell them that this came out of it, that pig there, and that came out of that, they will start to realize the value of the produce that they produce. We don't have value chains. So it's about value chains that we need to do. Now, Remember I said I need people who are going to go. You can actually provide a base station and make profit from that small base station with just 100 people and with a revenue of $200. You can make it. But go and talk to the people who are mobile operators. They will tell you we will not put our infrastructure there. That's why our people don't have internet. But you can actually make it very low. But what's happening is the current business model which operators are using does not work. So it's all about a business model. So infrastructure is about what? Value, and it's about coming up with a business model. If there is value, then the business model will work. I mentioned some of the areas that we can do infrastructure is that some people are talking about balloons. Use balloons that float, like what Google is doing, something called Loon. So there's a lot of balloons that then float. With those balloons, they'll be able to get internet almost everywhere. If we can get internet there, we'll be able to monitor, even in some areas where we are not allowed to go, but at a very low, well, it might not be at a very low cost, but we are able to move, traffic. Now, last mile, let me talk about last mile solutions. So we have put the infrastructure, but how do we get people communicating? How do we get people communicating? One of the ways to do communication, and I want you to go and check on this. There are applications. Okay, I want to do chatting with him, right? With WhatsApp, what do I need? I need data, is it? Right? And which is expensive, right? Okay. But his phone has got what? Wi-Fi on it, is it? Huh? His phone can connect to my phone. Huh? So why don't we come up with Nigerian applications? It has already been done that allows us, even as a society or even as a village, right? Even if we are in this room, to be able to be chatting without necessarily having to go to the internet. You see, they are saying that we're going to be voting. Sorry, I have to hit on you. Right now we are having to what? To vote on and ask questions, right? But we have got to use what? The internet, right? But it's just us in here. Why didn't you just come up with a platform that was going just to allow us using Bluetooth or something like that to be talking to a server that's local? Why are we going to the internet? Because, yeah, that's the application that we managed to get. That's how also the mobile opera. So you have applications that allow people to chat. Now, also at a village level, why don't you have the villagers, right, being able to communicate and have their own local content? They have a mast there, and they can actually be communicating on their own. They can communicate about crops. They can communicate about this, right? Do we necessarily have to give them internet? At times they don't need that. So those are ways in which you can make this easy and pretty affordable, right? The other one that I'll finish with is a question where I need people who can disrupt and think really outside the box. Right. What's the relationship between Coke and WhatsApp? Coca-Cola and WhatsApp. Come on. What's the you cannot tell the relationship between Coca-Cola and WhatsApp. Huh? Coca-Cola and WhatsApp. Yeah, I like this. Right. Okay, so that's fine, right? So can I then tell you what the relationship is, right? Now, Coca-Cola, if I was to ask you in your pocket, some of you might not have money, but you have got a what? A cell phone, is it? Huh? And that cell phone, you always pull it out to check WhatsApp, even if you know there is nobody who is actually looking for you. You just pull it out. What is that called? When you've got that behavior, when you do something, always, it's called a what? It's called an addiction. Coca-Cola is what? It's an addiction. So Coca-Cola and WhatsApp are addictive, is it? So if they are addictive, now, if I go to rural areas What will I find more between the two, Coca-Cola or WhatsApp? I'll find Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola, which is addictive, is found almost everywhere. WhatsApp, which is also addictive, you cannot find it. How does Coca-Cola get to the rural areas? It's delivered through trucks, Coca-Cola trucks that go to the rural areas. So, if in our rural area, if you buy a bun, you know a bun, I don't know what you call them, or popo, yeah, you call it what, popo? Fat cooks, popo, but we have got buns, we call them bun, a bun. If you buy a bun, what's the next thing that you ask for? Coca-Cola, is it? Because buns, yeah, bones, B-U-N-S, bones, okay, I'll read the Nigerian way. Bones, if you buy bones, right? Right. What do you ask for? For Coca-Cola. But Coca-Cola manages to get there with a truck. So try to think about this. What if you were a distributor? I said it's addictive. So what somebody wants is to sniff, right? To go, and have a high. If I was in the business of Coca-Cola, what I would actually do is to fit my truck with a satellite and make it a mobile internet access point. When I get to the rural, or I get to a certain point, if whether it's a school or it's a shopping mall that is in rural areas, make that a Wi-Fi point. Get people to come and connect. And once they've connected, right, they can download, they can do whatever they want to do, right? And when they are done, once I'm done offloading, I then move off. What does that do to my brand, right? Now, two things. The first thing is, if you are the first person to enable people to get onto the internet, it's like your first love. Who has ever forgotten their first love? Right? The old school, maybe people who are a bit older, I don't know whether it used to happen in Nigeria, we used to have a mobile cinema or movie, right? Yeah. And you knew that it was coming on this day, and you would actually watch movies. So get people to be what? Connected. The next thing is, people want to connect so much. Have you ever seen somebody comes to your home, they're first asking, can I have internet? Can I have this? Can I have this, right? Okay? So they will come and they'll buy more of your brand. Whether it's bread, all you've got to do is give them a scratch card. So they buy, so you say to them, buy this, and they'll compete to buy that, right? So what happens to your brand? Your brand gets to grow. So it's not just about delivering Coca-Cola, but you are also delivering what? Technology. And that technology, what does it do? It creates stickiness. Once it creates stickiness, there is a value proposition, because Coke and WhatsApp are both addictive. Thank you.
Very brilliant. Please, can we give him another round? Very, very loud round of applause. Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you. Very, very interesting. Talking about value proposition. Incidentally, I had him at the earlier session on technology, IT, when he was talking about value proposition. So I hope that we've all taken something very important away from that, and how to develop your business model. A value proposition is very important. Without it, I don't think we can build a successful business. And I particularly like the way he has used infrastructure, broken it down to the way that we can actually make an influence. Because, you know, in Nigeria, when we talk about infrastructure, you automatically think government. But now he's putting infrastructure in the hands of individuals, in our hands, and asking us to do something about it. And by so doing and having value proposition, I can imagine some of the examples he's given us. We can also create employment. So thank you very much, Brian, for a very brilliant presentation. Please, another round of applause for him. Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker is going to be coming up shortly, and that's Dennis. And he will also be sharing his views on... Oh, sorry. Alex. I didn't see him, so I decided I'd go. Okay, that's fine. Alex will be taking his presentation next. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. Please, can you give him a round of applause?
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out, and it's a real pleasure to be here. So I'm going to be speaking on energy and power infrastructure. specifically around access to clean and affordable energy. No, that doesn't move, I guess. Does it? Yeah. I can see people easier. Okay. Right. Before I get just into that, I like starting with the why behind things. Like why do we care about infrastructure? So my question is, what does energy have to do with the kingdom of God? Any thoughts? It's all right. What does energy have to do with the kingdom of God?
Energy is from the normal standard, the literal interpretation of energy, you see it as ability to do work.
The ability to do work. Yeah. Okay. That's great. That's.
And the workers in my
Yeah. Okay. You can come up and give my my presentation. You can go on to the next one. Right. So, in some translations it says, we're co-workers. We're co-workers with God. So to labor or to work, almost by definition, requires energy. It requires power. This other one, Jesus reminds us that He is the branches and we're the vines. And there's this idea that apart from Him we can't do anything. We get our source of strength from Him. So you might say, if you go to the next slide, God is our wall socket. We need, just like, this is like an updated analogy, just like there's a branch and vines, we need to be plugged into God to get our energy, to get our power. And without that, we're separated. The other point I wanted to make is that God cares about our well-being. And now maybe that's a little obvious to us, but I can tell you there are a lot of people, in my industry, and especially coming from the West, from meeting people from Europe and America, it's quite secular, and I think there's a perception that believers, they care about having people saved, and then that it doesn't matter anymore. After that, it's done. So even if to us, this is why I do what I do, because I know that God cares about these things. But we need to be part of our mission, and part of our proclamation of the gospel is letting everybody who know what God cares about. And He cares about people. He cares about their well-being. Human rights and all these things that even secular people will care about. Those ultimately were derived from Christian principles. And I think we need to be, in our work, proclaiming that gospel and demonstrating the care that God has for each of us as sons and daughters of God. So I am part of two businesses that focus on access to energy. This first one here is called Zonka Energy. And Zonka in Zulu and Xhosa means all or everybody. So the idea is that this is energy for all. We serve a small informal settlement in Cape Town. And really the idea is that Cape Town and in South Africa, it's still very spatially separated. That the people that live in this community were forcibly removed in the 1980s or the 1970s, I think, from declared white-only areas in Cape Town. And since then, they've been in this community for 40, 50 years. They have not had electricity in 40 or 50 years, even though all around them, there's people with electricity. The problem here is not that there aren't the resources or they're too far from the grid. The problem is that they're not allowed to connect to the grid. So this is the kind of people we're trying to reach. So just some statistics. About 8 million South Africans without access to electricity. South Africa, since '94, since democracy, has done a really great job of extending the electrical grid. They've recently, if you follow the power industry, they've recently actually starting to have a lot of trouble. They haven't been maintaining their infrastructure very well. They have a large number of coal power plants. So there is some increasing uncertainty on the national grid. But for the most part, they have been able to extend it. The people we work with in urban informal settlements, the challenge is either they're on private land, or they're in rights of ways that they're not allowed to be electrified, or they live in municipalities that don't have the resources to electrify informal settlements. Cape Town is actually a really well-resourced municipality, but so in South Africa, distribution is a responsibility of municipalities, and so in the more remote parts of the country, they struggle to connect people up. So really speaking about the challenges that we see, it's shocking to me, we did a survey in December last year. So we've electrified part of this community, but we haven't electrified the entire community. So we did a baseline survey to understand how much they were spending on energy when they didn't have access to electricity. And we found that they were spending on average about 450 to 500 Rand a month, which comes out about 10,000 Naira a month. And that's for paraffin, petrol for a generator, those sort of things. So really inferior solutions, dirty, low quality solutions, and they're paying a lot of money for that. Okay, so we've got a short video here. This is just gives you a background of the community we're working with. I think if you, here, I'll just, hopefully this works. Oh, the HDMI is not. So 2 points. One of the things that's really great about renewable energy is its scalability and its modularity. So we can put a small system on there, and we can make it affordable. The second point is just, and I think we've probably heard this emphasis over and over, but you need a business model. It's not enough to have technology, but you have to have a business model that works. I think the challenge with a lot of energy infrastructure is that the business model doesn't work, or it's a real struggle to get the business model to work. And you have a business model no matter whether it's government, from the largest projects to the smallest project, you have a business model of some sort. If you were in the morning session, you would have seen this. This is just an overview of the settlement. There's about 70 households. At the time of this, we had only served a small number. But the idea is safe, reliable, affordable. So we're switching them from dangerous fuel sources, and we're giving them something that this is not subsidized. So this is a purely 100% private business operation, and we have customers paying us consistently. Again, switch. Yeah, so just to emphasize the business model, so it's a pay-as-you-go model. So they get a certain number. They have 3 options in terms of how much energy they can use per day. These are really basic energy services. So you're not going to boil water, but you're going to be able to do lights, TV, fans, those sort of things. One of the new things that we'll be doing this coming summer in South Africa is working on a productive use package. So we want to be improving people's lives through lights, but also giving them new opportunities to make revenue themselves. So one of the ideas we're working on is having coolers or freezers so that people can sell ice, because there's no refrigerators in the community. So being able to have a business that is to generate ice and then sell that ice so that people can have meat in cooler boxes in their own homes. So we've built our own technology, and so this is, as I was sort of getting into what I was talking about this morning, but the technology, to offer something affordably, we use technology to make sure our costs are rock bottom really low, because otherwise we can't provide it at a level that people can pay for it. I think mostly, I've talked about this. Maybe you can go to the next one. So this is sort of from an investor pitch deck. So one of the things when you're talking to investors, they want to see validation, right? So they want to have proof that, hey, it's working before they fork over any of their money. So this is again from the survey we did last December, where we told people how much money they would have to pay and for what kinds of services, and we still had 78% of our respondents requesting the highest level of service at the highest cost. So that's really positive news for us to see that there's strong demand, but that TV package, that highest cost package, is still less than what they're paying right now for poor alternatives. So I'll be honest, our prices are kind of high. They're not what you would pay if you got it out of the grid. But compared to that's not the right comparison. The right comparison is, what are they paying now? And we're giving them better quality service for lower money. So we're getting consistent revenues. You can go to the next one. I think what's excited about where we're going, one of these things I haven't spoken of is the mobile data services. So this is kind of neat, where we have this power infrastructure, and in South Africa, I don't know what the data rates are like here, but South Africa, that's really expensive. The data is expensive. People buy it in really tiny increments, and they eke out their data. So, but you can actually, if you buy data in bulk, it's reasonably priced. So why don't we put data infrastructure, a Wi-Fi network on top of our mini grid, and then we can have a community Wi-Fi network. And hey, that's another business opportunity for somebody in the community to sell vouchers, to sell access to that network, so that we're generating opportunities within the community. I mentioned this already, but just again, the distributed renewables, being able to bring things down. Even I've been talking about relatively large things, but you can bring renewables down to the smallest, a little lantern that if that's what people can afford, then that's what you're providing out in the rural areas especially. So that's my work in South Africa. I'm here in Nigeria exploring, this is my second trip to Nigeria. There are absolutely opportunities here as well. They look different, and that's one of the things that we want to do is do some footwork and some groundwork to understand the energy situation in Lagos in particular. We're looking in Lagos before we jump in with a solution. I think if we have a point, we probably all have sort of issues that we're passionate about, ideas, like I have this cool solution. But so often what people do is they put the solution before the problem. And they can say, I know what the problem is, I'm just going to put the solution out there. So what we're trying to do is step back and say, like, we've got a pretty good idea of what might be a good solution. But before we jump out and, sorry, can you just, go back. We have a potential investor who's coming, but they're not familiar with the market. So what we're trying to do is, okay, let's take a bit of time. I know everybody loves to scale quick, fail fast and scale quickly. It's a little bit harder when you've got expensive infrastructure. Let's take a bit of time, understand customers' needs, make sure we've got something that meets people's need and they can afford it. One of the things that I've been hearing as I speak with people who are familiar with this industry is the challenge is the people who can afford a device want more power than what you're offering, and the people that want the power level you're sort of offering, they'll struggle to afford it. And so that's where the business model, where you really have to do your research. How do you come up with clever solutions to make something affordable, financing or having the right features or whatever, so that they are willing to pay for it and they'll be falling over themselves trying to pay you money. You can go to the next one. So just some of what we've learned from some secondary research here in Nigeria. We spend somewhere between $300 and $700 million a year purchasing generators, and $22 billion a year fueling generators, which is about the GDP of Zimbabwe. And it's just burned. It's just burned. What if you were investing that in infrastructure that would continually produce energy, right? What an opportunity that is. So I was here back in March. I was out in a bunch of the markets on the mainland talking to business owners. Again, the idea here is we want to offer a product that is an opportunity for people to take control of their businesses, to help them do their own businesses. That's really empowering them. So that's the kind of the market segment we're looking at. So if that's who we want to reach, we need to go talk to them, understand how they're using energy right now. How much are they spending? It's very difficult asking money questions because then it immediately becomes a negotiation. So we're trying to come up, survey design. How do I ask questions in a way that elicits the information I need without getting into an endless negotiation? Because I didn't even have a product. I wasn't selling anything. I was just asking questions. You'll probably know these statistics. About 1 to 3 hours a day of access to the grid in a lot of places. One thing I found interesting is that this tends to vary geographically, so different parts of the city, even just within Lagos, right? Geographically, and I think it varies based on the distribution companies, has a lot to do with it. Businesses will run their generators 6 to 10 hours a day. They tend to negotiate, so they'll have 3 or 4. You probably all know this, but this was interesting to me. 3 or 4 businesses come together and share a larger generator. I came in thinking every business was going to have their own generator, but actually it's 4 or 5 businesses, or even 100 businesses, a single building, and then there's one guy who runs the generator, and that's his business. He's got a 100 kVA generator, and he powers the whole thing. And they spend probably anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 naira a week on fuel. So that's about it. I think just to emphasize for myself is that, and you may have heard me say it this morning, it's a journey. Start it now, but don't expect it to suddenly change overnight. You have to do your homework, you have to do your research, you have to know your customer, and you have to invest the time and the energy to really, make that change from business person to nation changer. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alex. Please, can we give him another round of applause? again speaking to individual businesses, but he's also put a slightly different spin to his presentation. You know, lots of useful information in the presentation that you can use not only for infrastructure, but for any other type of business. He spoke about renewable energy. I'm sure that you all know that that is, has become quite topical and of great interest to investors. And he also spoke, which I found interesting, and I hope you took note as well, of what investors are looking for. Because if you're looking to go into this sort of business, most of the time you don't want to use all your capital. So you want to understand what would attract investors. What should you be doing to invite investors to your business? He also gave useful insights into how to go into a business. So you don't go with a solution without understanding the problem. And he emphasized the importance of research. Thank you very much, Alex. I think this has been quite useful, at least for me, so I hope you also found his presentation quite interesting. So we have the last speaker this afternoon, and that is Daniel. And Daniel will also be speaking about infrastructure. Please give him a round of applause as he comes up. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm Daniel Miller. I'm the head of origination and structuring at InfraCredit. InfraCredit is a subsidiary of the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority. Apologies from Mr. Uche Orji, who's the managing director of NSIA. He couldn't be here due to a last-minute event. He's also the chairman of my company, so he's on my board. All my sort of credit approvals go through our credit committee, and we're very closely intertwined when it comes to infrastructure in Nigeria. A bit about InfraCredit, because I can talk about my company better than I can talk about NSIA. So InfraCredit was set up because of the infrastructure deficit in Nigeria and the fact that we already have a lot of the tools to develop. One of those is the pension industry in Nigeria. Pension industry, which essentially became private in 2004, today is sitting on 9 trillion naira in assets under management. So whereas a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa and other developing markets in the world are trying to figure out where can the money come from, Nigeria is already sitting on 9 trillion naira in pension assets. And it's a question of how do we bring them to invest into the real sector or the power sector or infrastructure, because today, really, they're not being asked to do anything very risky. Most people they simply don't want their pension money to be lost. So they're very happy to see the pension funds take zero risk, buy government bonds, that's government debt, and they know they'll be paid. So this is where my company comes in, actually as a guarantor of infrastructure debt finance. We guarantee that the principal and interest on these debt instruments will be paid. And so we're a catalyst for bringing that pension money into infrastructure. Now, the theme of this presentation, catalyzing growth in Nigeria, investing in the power sector. Anyone who has spent a reasonable amount of time here deals with the power challenge and the fact that if we could just solve this, so much could happen, right? Every business, every household, every hospital, every school would perform better. All of our lives would be better if we could solve this. And because we spend so much time talking about it and living with it and dealing with it, it becomes this this like beast that we start to doubt whether it can be solved. But the reality is it's been solved in most of the world. So this is solvable. The challenge is usually maybe the environment, the protections for investors, or investing in the wrong areas of the chain, or a lot of times it's been borrowing in foreign currency, and then when a devaluation happens, not being able to pay those debts. So the power sector has gotten this bad name, But the reality is, and as Alex and Brian have also spoken, customers generally worldwide are willing and able to pay if you could just give them decent service. That's what you have to do. So instead of investing in one area of the chain or another area of the chain, we have to figure out how to bring the investment into the distribution side of the chain. That's where the customers are. If you want to spend time on gas and transmission and generation, a lot of times you will still fail to serve the customer because the distribution infrastructure has been the neglected portion by and large. He talked about customers getting 1 to 3 hours of light a day. I mean, I was just in a meeting with one of the distribution companies, and they're giving one area of the city 22 hours of a light a day. So, I mean, I usually, and again, their wish generally would be to supply everyone, but there's not enough megawatts coming to them, and they don't have the capability to deliver it. So I usually liken it to a chef in a restaurant that just doesn't have enough food to make to satisfy everyone. So if I were that chef in this restaurant, I would be like, okay, all of the people here, please go to another restaurant. I will just satisfy these. These are the ones that I could actually give 24/7 power supply, or in that case, a good meal to, and I would have a viable business. But if I'm going to give 5 hours here and 3 hours there and 20 hours here and 6 hours there, at the end of the day, nobody's happy. Nobody's happy. It's actually keeping everyone kind of equally dissatisfied, or even some are more dissatisfied. You can't have a business if your customers are dissatisfied, right? It's not how you would run a business. So again, a bit about myself, just before I jump in. I've been in Nigeria for 12 years. I'm married, I live here, my kids are here, my life is here. So I deal with the same challenges of roads, and I have my gen, and we bought a new gen a few months ago, and we needed to replace the battery, and we realized that battery can't be found. The type of gen I have, that battery doesn't actually, it's not common enough. So we had to now change things. These are the daily challenges that the average Nigerian goes through, and it reduces productivity. We talk about women having to walk 6 kilometers in the village. That's a lack of, that kills productivity. But the same thing happens to us. Even people that are living at an upper echelon of society, we still deal with these same inefficiencies that hinder our productivity, hinder our work, hinder our investments, our profits, to be able to pay employees and really bring this up. We have to solve the infrastructure gap, and power is about the biggest challenge in the nation. Now, it goes beyond that to roads and ports and everything else, rail, but power is the single biggest impediment generally to the reindustrialization of Nigeria. Where are we today? 180 million people, but still living on infrastructure that was meant to cater to maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 million people. That 4,000 megawatt power supply generation level that we typically hear in the press, that's because people like to take the peak level. They like to hear about the high number. The reality is, we as a nation we're still sending power to Benin Republic and Niger. So imagine, okay, let's remove 5 or 10% of the power. Now we also have transmission losses, so let's remove 11% of the power. Then we have technical losses on the distribution network, so remove another 11% of the power. So NERC publishes these statistics. The regulator in Nigeria publishes the statistics. The third quarter last year was the last report I remember looking at, although they've just recently published the next few. The average power delivered to consumers via the distribution grid in Nigeria was 2,800 megawatts. I mean, you have a state like Kano, that whole disco was getting maybe 200 megawatts per hour, and that's meant to power, one of the biggest cities in sub-Saharan Africa, and not just Kano, because I think, I forget what other states, 2 other states are attached to that distribution company. So, the demand is again, if you take 180 million people, that means we should have 180,000 megawatts of power. But we're actually talking about 3,000 that actually reach the people. So we're short by a factor of 60. Like, that's how much investment needs to happen. Most of the power today is gas-fired because Nigeria is blessed with natural gas. 3 of the main plants are actually hydro plants, all located in Niger State. They provide the lowest cost power. And most of these plants were privatized in 2013. So most of the generation assets and distribution assets in the nation were privatized, but the transmission is still owned by the federal government. And what has happened in the last 6 years, some of the generating plants have been sort of reinvigorated, especially some of these hydros, the Ughelli plant in Delta State, Egbin in Lagos. So the generation, some serious investment went into generation, but we cannot say the same level of investment went into gas or transmission or distribution. So you have some investors on the generation side who now feel aggrieved, if you will. Let's go to the next. Okay, so again, this would be hard to believe for anyone in the world. Actual supply remains at 20%, 25% of capacity. So as a nation, we're all running generators at home, and we have generating plants that are only producing 25% of what they're capable of producing. So anybody that looks at this says, this doesn't make any sense. Why would it be that we have multi-billion-dollar plants on the generation side, and we're spending $22 billion a year fueling our generators, as Alex said? It doesn't make any sense. Why can't we fix the things in between to allow generation to reach the end customer? That's the challenge. So we keep investing here. Obasanjo, they keep investigating. They say he spent $8 billion, $16 billion on power, and they want to know where it all went. Well, the plants were built. They're there. Okay, but those plants are typically operating at less than 25% of capacity because they did not spend on the transmission network. They did not spend on the distribution networks. So the plants are there, and you can't actually realize return on your investment, and we will keep suffering. So if we keep neglecting transmission and distribution, we're not going to solve the challenge. Keep going, please. Okay, from a system standpoint, you basically have the GenCos. Again, mix of gas and hydro. Technically, they push that through the transmission grid to the discos, to all of us. But from a payment standpoint, the GenCos send their invoice to the bulk trader, who then aggregates those invoices and splits it among the 11 distribution companies. If the federal government is not bailing out the sector, which for now they are, they're actually taking money from CBN every month and adding to the invoices. But before that, about 25% is all the discos were able to pay to MBET, who would then pay to the GenCos. Now, part of that is the discos not doing a good job. But a lot of that is actually because they sold these assets in 2013 for US dollars. There's no reason to sell them for US dollars. So all these guys finance their borrowings in dollars. And what that means is when the devaluation happened in 2016, they should have had to double the tariff or even triple the tariff. Sorry about that. They should have had to increase the tariff in order to account for the devaluation. Now, that would not have been politically possible. So they didn't move the tariff that much. It just wouldn't have made any sense to the average customer. So now you have this gap where the regulator is supposed to increase tariffs, but everybody knows it's not politically possible. If they had simply sold the assets for Naira and told the Nigerian banks, you will lend to these guys in Naira, you remove that foreign exchange component from the entire system. Then we wouldn't be talking about tariff shortfall. Every day, Disco's talking tariff shortfall. The end customer wondering, what do you mean? Give me power, I'll pay. Who's not paying? I'll pay. So we have this disconnect, but that's part of where the right financing, the right structures need to be used to make the sector work. If we had Nairized the system as much as possible, we wouldn't have as big of a gap. So maybe they would be paying 60% instead of 25%. And maybe the federal government wouldn't have to be bailing out the sector with another trillion naira here or there every year. Again, key players in the sector, NERC is the regulator, and they've been kind of stuck. When the devaluation was happening, they abandoned the minor reviews that they're normally supposed to do. Every 6 months, they're supposed to move rates in line with inflation, foreign exchange, and the like. MBET is that grid-based buyer of power. They were not supposed to be a permanent vehicle. They're supposed to be a temporary vehicle. And they're supposed to fade away because they're supposed to have a viable sector by now. Really, the GenCos should be able to sell directly to the DISCO and simply pay a transmission fee to the transmission company. You shouldn't have to be selling to a bulk trader. But that's still the model today. The system operator is part of the transmission company. The gas aggregator, again, that's on the upstream side. It's an unfortunate aspect of our system here. The investment that we require is largely in transmission and distribution. This is established because 75% of the power being offered by the GenCos is being rejected by the grid. But the people who tend to have the ears of those in authority are the oil and gas guys. So the oil and gas guys will be saying, well, I want to develop a field and I have a lot of gas and I want to sell the gas to this new power plant, and I don't need you to pay me for the gas. I just need to make sure that you pay the power plant for his power. And so there's still this focus on new generation that we don't actually need right now. So if somebody wants to do a $1 billion project in generation and be guaranteed by the government that they will be paid, which is the model most GenCos in the world use. They say, I will build my plant. You, the government, guarantee me 70% payment, okay? It's going to cost me $1 billion to build this thing, so I need an assurance. Whether you take the power or not, that's your problem. I just need to be paid for my capacity that I'm making available to you. That's a standard GenCo investment model. And that is, what is attracting some people in government to still be talking about generation, when the reality is they should put that $1 billion to transmission and distribution. It would make the 25 to 30 existing on-grid GenCos more viable overnight because more of their power would be taken by the grid. Consumers will be happier. Happy consumer means they're willing and able to pay. So FGN initiatives to de-risk the sector. There is a power sector recovery program. It was announced in early 2017. The World Bank helped develop it, but they're really still discussing it. So if you, even in the papers now, the World Bank is talking about a $3 billion loan to Nigeria. That's still tied to this plan from 2.5 years ago, which is basically the World Bank helping, loan money to the sector, to plug some of the financial gaps, make sure there's consistent investment into the transmission infrastructure, which is still owned by the Nigerian government, but also making sure that the regulator does the minor tariff reviews that it's meant to do. It's being discussed, but again, we have to work with the plans or without the plan. We still have to find ways to invest, and that's where some of the off-grid investment models work. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, the next one. Okay, challenges and investment opportunities. So again, and this is where we come in. The various challenges underscore the importance of massive and sustained investment in distribution and transmission network to provide a technically and commercial viable offtake. Okay, there's little point in me putting up my power plant if people are not properly connected, if they're not properly metered, right? So I have to, if I'm going to set up my independent power plant, or if I'm going to, take from the grid and supply an area under a franchise regulation, at the end of the day, I need to make sure that the customers are properly served and metered. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what I do on the gas side, doesn't matter what I do on the generation side. I have to focus my investment on the transmission, on the distribution side, in order to have a viable project. If I'm happy with my customers, and if I know they're technically viable because I've done the network upgrade, commercially viable because I've studied their load patterns and I know they're metered properly, I'm happy to supply them. And that's whether it's a 10 megawatt mini grid or a 100 megawatt independent power plant that supplies an area, the same principle applies. I have to be able to make sure I have a group of satisfied customers that I know they are the ones I'm going to collect from. They're the ones I'm going to, pledge those cash flows to the bank, to raise the financing. So a lot of the focus, like I said, it needs to be on the distribution and the transmission side. More and more people are looking at, so again, the regulator has come up with ways to allow investors, and this is, again, it wouldn't be obvious to most people. So if my office is on Sanusi Fafunwa, just behind here. But this street would be the same way. You'll find that every single premises on this street has a generator, right? On Idoro Taylor behind, every single premises has a generator. On Sanusi Fafunwa, everyone. On Ajose, everyone. So wait a minute. I could just put my power plant and serve 4 customers. It should work. This is the easiest business in the world. So most people, the first time they come here, they get very excited and they believe that they can do this. It's only when they start talking to their bankers and things that they find out you're not allowed to do that. You're actually not allowed by the regulation to just go in, set up a plant, even if it's the world standard. You're simply not allowed to go and set it up, connect 4 buildings, and have your business. You will go to the regulator and say, I would like a generation license. So, okay, but you're not allowed to distribute, okay? Then you get the form on the website, you apply for a distribution license, and you find that it is not really taken seriously, okay? You don't get rejected, you don't get it approved, it just hangs, okay? And again, this is not corruption. This is because we have a broken system right now. You have distribution companies that owe billions of dollars to the banks, and people don't want to have them losing their choice customers. So the regulator, rather than increasing the pain for the distribution companies and the banks, they would just rather kind of leave things as they are. They then came out with, and it's, I don't know if it's on here, but this, Independent Electricity Distribution Network. That was supposed to be the next way that, okay, you can't get a big multi-state distribution license, but you can get an independent one. So I'll get an IEDN. But those applications have also languished, unfortunately. The next one was the eligible customer framework. Really, well, they both existed, embedded generation and eligible customer. The embedded generation, these regulations existed prior to the privatization even, but they didn't have a lot of the rules attached to them. But the latest one is really, well, embedded generation, again, you wouldn't be allowed to distribute, so you still have to work with a distribution company and figure out how to share revenue, and that's usually a challenge for businesses to figure out how to share. The eligible customer was approved in December 2017 as a new way of allowing GenCos to access customers directly, the right to their cash flows, but most of those applications have stalled. A lot of people made applications in the second quarter of 2018. NERC has even published those applications on their website, but they have not approved or rejected most of the applications. One that they did approve was Sura Market in Lagos, where an IPP was allowed to connect to that market. And that was, a bit of that was just the challenge of the distribution company supplying those shops, and a bit of that was political, that people wanted to see a market connected. So it was, nobody objected, and the regulator approved that one. But that's the only eligible customer I know that was approved. One of the hydros, Mainstream in Niger State, is supplying customers on an eligible customer contract basis, but I'm not aware that the regulator ever approved those contracts. So again, these things exist, but there's this fear of removing choice customers from the system, because if discos are only paying 25% of their bill today, what happens when you remove some of their best customers, right? You're exacerbating a problem. So the latest, and it's not on this page actually, it's probably on another one, is franchising. This is the latest regulation from the distribution company. And anytime they come out with new regulations, we have to take advantage of the opportunity, right? The distribution company goes through the hard work of bringing out a new regulation. So the latest is a franchise regulation. It's a key current investment opportunity in the Nigerian power space to say, okay, I will take an area of a disco. I will take just, this Keystone Bank Crescent. I want that to be my franchise. And I want to apply for it, and I want to upgrade the infrastructure there. And that is, I mean, I'm using the example where we're standing, but that can be done in choice areas, that can be done in downscale areas, but this is something that we have to make it work. Now, it's not that easy to just sit with a distribution company and agree that you're going to take part of his network away from him, right? You have to figure out how to leverage the political side, the customer side. If the customer wants you to come in and upgrade their area, if you have the data to show that those customers are suffering today, they're getting 3 hours of electricity a day, right? You start to build a case here that these are underserved customers and they have a right to better service. Somebody wants to come in and upgrade the infrastructure. They are applying for a franchise. This is what we need to now take advantage of. Again, the regulation was published for draft. It hasn't been finalized yet, but it is the new opportunity really to start taking parts of distribution companies. And if you heard, again, what the other speakers said, most customers can and will pay. They're paying through the use of their petrol or diesel generator today. They're paying through the fact that their equipment in the house is breaking down from the power surges, right? They're paying from the challenge of maintaining their existing gen. So there's a high cost to not having good power, not having good power supply. So the customers are already paying, and they're able to pay for a better solution by and large. So the franchising is the sort of smaller scale opportunity that exists in the market today. So this is, you have your transformer, your transmission system is really 330 kV. So how does the system work? Generators typically generate at 11 kilovolts. And now you need a massive step-up transformer to take it up to 330 kilovolts or 132 kilovolts. Those are the levels that the transmission company sends power around the country at. They have to step it up to those levels for efficiency to be able to now transport it from, Delta all the way to Lagos or Niger State all the way up to Sokoto. It has to be at a high voltage. That's the efficient way, otherwise your losses will be too much. As you get closer to the end customer, you now have to start stepping it down. So those transformers that we usually see around our houses that serve the neighborhood, those are typically an 11 kV transformer, and they're stepping it down to 415. That's usually the transformer that you know on the corner is the one that serves you, is that 11 kV. So this step down is from 132 down to 33, from 33 down to 11, and from 11, that sometimes goes directly to businesses. They'll take it at 11, they'll have their own transformer step down if they need to. But pretty much every consumer is receiving at 415 kilovolts. Now, like I said, a lot of times the investment that people talk about are the things that they can see and understand. So people talk about generation because they know General Electric or Siemens, these big companies that sell turbines and back them, and a power plant is something you can stand in front of and take a picture and it will be in the papers. It's really hard to stand in front of transmission and distribution infrastructure. No, it's a political challenge for the average person that you want to build something and you're being told, well, the solution is actually to run a line from here to Jakande. I thought, well, how am I going to do that? I could put up a signboard, but I can't really, I want a power plant. I want a turbine I can stand in front of. It's just an unfortunate challenge for the average politician anywhere in the world. And the other thing they know is meters. Oh, we should be metered, we should be metered, we should be metered. But again, the reality today is that extra power plant isn't going to help us generally if it's a big power plant. And that meter doesn't really provide you power. It might help you, be treated more fairly and justly by the distribution company, but it's not going to give you more power. And most of us, what we need is power. And that means we have to be investing here, the transformers, the lines, the feeders, the cables, the conductors, and the customer meter. But that's where the investment is required. And like I said, I just was in a meeting with one of the distribution companies, and they have an area that they want to improve power supply to the city, and the focus is how much money do you need to improve that area? And his answer is 1.1 billion naira. That's what he needs in this kind of infrastructure to improve power supply. And then those customers will pay a good price, maybe 40 naira, maybe 50 naira per kilowatt, but whatever price that is, it allows him to repay the money he would borrow to upgrade that area of the system. And that's the distribution company saying, this is what I need to do. But today, the distribution companies can't borrow. If they can't pay for the power already, that means their financial records are negative. They're in the red. No bank will lend to a distribution company if he can't even pay for his core product. In accounting terms, he's making a gross loss. Normally, you go through your margins, your gross margin, your EBITDA margin, your EBIT margin, your net, your PBT margin, your net margin. His top margin is already negative. His gross margin is already negative. So nobody can lend to a distribution company. He can't be the one to borrow and finance this. Everybody else in the room needs to be the one to say, I can do it for the disco. And because I'm going to be the one to fund this, I need to structure it my way. My quality control, my operation and maintenance, my commercial system, I have a right to those cash flows. Now, between a distribution company and the investor, that can be a difficult discussion. But when a lender is involved, and that's where, again, my company comes in, we're a guarantor of debt finance. So we're essentially a senior creditor. So the bank, or in my case, InfraCredit, is the one that says, no, you guys will sort out the commercials between you, but all the cash flows are going in this account because the debt has to be paid first. Any bank will tell you that. That's the system. So that's the sort of control that you require. And now, again, most of this needs to be repaid over years. You can't just put down 1 billion naira and repay it in 6 months, right? You need long-term financing. You need local currency financing. These are the solutions that, thankfully, match exactly what pension funds want to invest in. Pension funds, is Nigeria a youthful country or is Nigeria an old country? We are youthful. So most pension funds are looking at the fact that they don't have to pay out for most of their pensioners. They don't have to pay out for 30 years, 40 years. They're looking for long, so their liability is the fact that they have to pay out, but their liabilities are very long term. So they want to find assets that are also long term. You match your assets and liabilities. So the pension funds are a natural financier in Nigeria for all infrastructure, whether it's roads, bridges, ports. The pension funds are really the catalyst that we want to bring into the system. Banks can do their part, but they're typically constrained because their liabilities are typically shorter term. We all have deposits in banks. We could remove them tomorrow. So they have short-term liabilities. They can't lend as long as they want to. A bank might want to lend 10 years, but he's looking at matching his liability. So we have to work together, NSIA, InfraCredit, investors, the regulator, everybody has to be working together to figure out how to bring pension money in. Now, pension money is not the only money, but on the back of that, people will bring equity if they believe that they're going to get a return. Okay. What have we done so far? We've backed 3 power companies that have raised 31.5 billion naira from the Nigerian debt capital market. One of these was the first 10-year corporate infrastructure bond in the country by a private company. One of these was the first 15-year corporate infrastructure bond, and one of these was the first corporate green bond, and it was also a 15-year corporate infrastructure bond. These investments were made by 15 pension funds, the likes of ARM and Leadway and Stanbic, and the well-known large pension companies. So 15 pension funds invested in these 3 long-term bonds. This has sort of proven the case that yes, pension funds can and will invest in infrastructure and the power sector if they are structured properly. So in this case, we're providing them full credit enhancement, full guarantee of principal and interest payments over the life of these bonds. That means we're taking the credit risk. We have to monitor the performance of these companies. They have to be paid. 2 of these are off-grid companies supplying state infrastructure, hospitals, or state-owned enterprises. One of these is an on-grid company. That's North-South Power. They issued the green bond. They run a 600-megawatt hydropower plant in Niger State. They suffer from the same payment challenges from MBET, but because they're a hydro company, they're not paying for gas every month. Their cost of operation is far lower than your typical gas-fired plant, your thermal plant. So they can actually survive if the payments are not as robust as they would like from NBET. But in all cases, they are encouraged to grow their business, find new projects, whether it's captive IPPs, whether it's new mini hydro plants. In North-South Power's case, they've won a 30-megawatt hydro concession in Kaduna State. They have to figure out how to upgrade the transmission works to bring that power out of that plant. It was something that was built years ago, but the government will now put it under a 35-year concession. In Viathan's case, they power Lagos State infrastructure in Lekki and Marina, the Akute Waterworks. They have 2 other power plants. On the back of our financing, they were able to add to their generation capacity. They were also able to build a compressed natural gas plant up in Abeokuta. So we're able to facilitate this investment because they're paying over the long term, 10 to 15 years. If this was a 5-year borrowing, they would struggle to build something and pay back a loan. So this is what my company does, backed by NSIA, backed by KfW Development Bank from Germany, AFC, and Garantco from the UK. And now that we've done our first few projects, we have to scale. We're really in the scaling mode now. So now I have another pipeline of 100 billion naira worth of projects, some in power, some in transportation, like toll roads and haulage companies, and some in like telecoms, ICT, that's base stations and telecom towers, like really trying to bring more pension money into different aspects of infrastructure in Nigeria. We can go to NSIA's slides. Yeah, keep going. For NSIA's part, that'd be hard to see, maybe. NSIA has an existing portfolio of $680 million, right? And part of this is in agriculture. Part of this is in projects like the Second Niger Bridge, Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. Part of basically helping implement the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund, which has also the Kano Abuja roadway. So NSIA is driving large-scale infrastructure on the federal side very much. They've organized the fertilizer space in Nigeria, which has crashed the fertilizer price by about 30% around the country, and that's basically around really using bulk procurement, economies of scale to deliver the inputs to Nigeria, and then making sure they're brought to the blending plants and available locally. It just showed that this public-private approach, where you have private sector style management to make sure you achieve the efficiencies, you can actually get major projects done. Next slide. Yeah, keep going, please. Yeah, so again, I can't speak as much about NSIA and everything they do, but basically they will keep growing, they will keep doing major infrastructure projects. And as we at InfraCredit grow to be able to back larger and larger size infrastructure, we'll be able to back, say, a 60 billion naira bond or a 100 billion naira bond. The pension money is there sitting on 9 trillion naira. So this is not impossible to do, but we have to figure out the right way to structure these investments. In the power space, a lot of focus is on distribution. I've shown you a lot of the larger scale, but also you can do these micro projects. There is some headway into mini grids. A lot of these are solar mini grids in rural spaces where perhaps there's a little subsidy element up front from the World Bank just to ensure the viability of these neighborhoods. But the Rural Electrification Agency has been driving a lot of the sort of rural and some urban mini grids, mainly solar. There's also the federal water, I can't remember the ministry's name, but they have a lot of dams around the country where if you just added a little small generator to the dam. It's called retrofitting. You just add a generator to the existing dam, and you start to generate maybe 3 to 5 megawatts of power. You can now attach some agricultural development to that power project. So they're starting to do these concessions of sort of mini hydro dams. So the opportunities are there, both in the urban space and in the rural space, using the franchise regulation, using some of the metering regulation that the regulator has come out with, working with mini hydro, working with mini grids, and really we just have to understand who we want to satisfy at the end of the day, and then structure a project to satisfy them. So, okay.
Thank you very, very, very much, Brian. Daniel, I beg your pardon. I don't know about you, but this has been a very balanced session. This is, we talk about electricity and the challenges that we have, and we all have different views of what those problems are. Some people say it's generation, some people say it's distribution, some people say it's metering. And I think Daniel's presentation this afternoon has just thrown a lot of light into the sector, and I hope that we now fully understand what's going on. But more importantly, what we can do, how we fit into this problem, how we can become a solution. I'm not going to summarize everything he said, but I believe we have the presentations after the session that will be put on our website. So if you would like to just spend more time, because I noticed some people were taking pictures of some slides, if you would like to spend more time on the presentations, you could do so after the session. I'd like to invite all the speakers to please come up. We're now going into the Q&A session. Please, gentlemen, please sit down. Anyway. Are the speakers on? Okay. The first question is to Alex. And this is on why are those communities not allowed to be connected to the grid?
Under, as I hear some South Africans, so I'm originally from the U.S., so maybe you can tell from my voice, but I live in South Africa. They'll say under the prior dispensation, which means apartheid, there were forced removals, and so a lot of these people lived in areas where they designated whites only, and then they kicked them out. And some of these communities then either were moved to new townships, some of them settled on private land, and so they basically were squatting. And because they're technically they're on private land, that's not their land, the ESCOM, the national utility, is not allowed to make a connection to them. In the city of Cape Town, I think actually it's their responsibility. The distribution is their responsibility. They're not allowed to connect them up. So that's often the reason why in urban areas. Otherwise, you'll have settlements underneath transmission lines. You'll have them in swamps, in railroad right-of-ways, those sort of things where even though the electric line is right there, they're not allowed to connect them. Now, if they're close enough, they'll just pull cable, and they'll steal electricity. In some cases, in our community, it happened that they were far enough away from that was difficult. So it's a variety of reasons. It's quite different from a lot of other African countries where it's in rural areas. It's more of a capacity issue. What's interesting is with I was speaking on the distributed nature of renewables. You now have the technology to go out and conceivably at an affordable rate electrify deeply rural and remote communities.
I do hope that we're at the tail end and the right people are listening and they can make a change. Because the next question also speaks directly to that. It takes us from the last point you raised, which is you had mentioned that the main challenge is to power supply and transmission and distribution to the end users. So what is the best solution to that?
This year I was to do 60 billion naira worth of transactions, and unfortunately I've done about 21.5. Like, I haven't done enough transactions. I need to structure more transactions. Part of that was the challenge of maybe the elections and policy waiting. Part of that is just, you know, finding the right deals and bringing companies into the space. But going forward, we need to be financing more projects. I need to be financing more projects by mobilizing pension money into 20 billion naira investments into one zone or another zone. So somebody can power the city of Wari. Somebody can do Sokoto. Somebody can do Jos. Like, you can just have these pockets of investments. But this is going to be the right financing. This is the pension money, 15-year funds to allow these projects roll out the infrastructure over 2 years, have a 3-year moratorium on principal repayment so that you're not having to pay back as much. Really, it's just bringing the right financing into these structures. But that means you need long-term regulatory certainty that you have a right over those cash flows. You have to include the distribution company. They'll have to be paid something for allowing you to come in and power that area. They have existing infrastructure that you will now take over and upgrade. But really, we have to bring the right financing into the right projects in the power space. And really, there's two models that are being discussed right now. So you can either bring money from the bring power from the transmission grid through existing distribution infrastructure and upgrade the distribution infrastructure. That might not guarantee you 24/7 power supply because it's still coming through the grid, but generally if you pay the transmission company a premium, they will prioritize power to certain areas, right? They just want to make sure they're being paid. So they will now say, okay, that 132 kV line to that 33 kV, I'm going to prioritize there. So this is one approach, is saying let's work with transmission and distribution. You still have to upgrade distribution infrastructure, though, to satisfy those customers. And the other is these IPPs. So you find a GenCo that you can attach to, an off-grid IPP, typically. Sometimes an on-grid if you're going through transmission, through the grid, but basically you still need a company that you can point to that has been successful, that can raise money. So the typical off-grid or on-grid GenCo in Nigeria has at least profit on paper, and so he can be the financing vehicle. I can use North-South Power or Viathan or one of my clients, or I can use a new IPP. I could say he's the one raising the money, but it's actually for transmission and distribution works. Because he has power, he wants to supply. He's not getting a right to those cash flows. To get a right to those cash flows, he has to invest in transmission and distribution. So this is the structure that we're generally looking at. Attach a GenCo to be able to raise the money for the distribution. Otherwise, you can't back it directly as a distribution company. One thing I say is we basically get this chance once every 4 years to get it right. Okay, so a lot of new state governors are in now, and we can go to them now and say, it can be done in your state, okay? I've seen it done here in Lagos, or I've seen it done there in Zimbabwe or South Africa. Like, you gotta believe every 4 years that we get a chance to fix this, so then we need to take advantage of the opportunity. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. If we didn't believe it was fixable, none of us would be here.
What I just want to find out is, in terms of the revenue model, if as a supplier of diesel, I'm going to be getting subsidies. If you look, isn't that a warped revenue model where for me, I don't really care. So I need the generators and I'll go and fight. Remember, some of these guys could actually be people who really are making quite a lot of money. So it's easier for them to put that, to get the subsidy for supposedly delivered fuel, because I'm not too sure whether they get paid for receipts that they delivered. I'm not quite sure how the subsidy works. Does it work on terms of the fuel that somebody says, yes, he received, or I can be doing what we call air supply? I said I supplied so much fuel, or I brought in a container, I did this. So they make more money than actually value addition. So there is no impetus on doing value addition and converting that diesel into electricity.
But yes, so the smaller the project, the bigger the challenge one will have competing with the existing petrol generators that are already on ground. So some of these markets that people have been trying to power in various parts of the country, you'll find that the users are using, they all have their existing generators. If they're running a petrol generator, that's, basically because petrol is subsidized, somebody bringing in a solar mini grid may struggle to compete with the existing price. The bigger the project, the easier it is because you get your economies of scale. Then you're dealing with what duties am I paying to bring my panels in and my batteries in, because we're not manufacturing these locally. And that's the next challenge most of the mini grid guys have, is that they're supposed to get duty-free import of the panels, the panels you put on the roof, but they'll still be battling somebody in the Port Authority, customs over it. But they still have to pay duties on the batteries. So so if we said, hey, we want a cleaner environment, we said, okay, solar and batteries should be duty free. Let's make sure these come in. Whereas the petrol is essentially duty free. It's already subsidized at the end user. But there's usually not as much talk of a petrol cartel. It's usually viewed as a diesel cartel, as that these are the guys stopping us from having our power sector work. I'm not somebody who believes in that. I don't believe that any project, I've never seen a project get stopped because somebody was threatened by the diesel cartel. I just never seen it. So I don't believe the myth. I think it's an unnecessary excuse. No, I've lived in West Africa long enough. Like when I was in Togo, the luxury buses that we call them here, they were threatened by the Danfo cartel. I had to take buses 13 hours up country in the Danfo because that was the market. Like you could actually threaten someone from starting a long bus company, and they did. So I know what that looks like, and I've not seen that here. But yes, there are existing interests maybe that are making money from diesel. It's not out of the realm of possibility that these guys will be kind of telling the regulator, don't approve these projects. I just don't necessarily believe that that's the case, but we can do more to allow the cleaner energy solutions to come in duty-free and make them more cost competitive. I don't see us really ending the subsidy on petrol anytime soon. A lot of people make a lot of money off the petrol subsidy. Yes, we had a big scandal a few years ago where they were being paid whether they brought the product in or not. Some people brought the same product in 99 days in a row. These kind of things were there, and so there are vested interests to keep the petrol subsidy in place in the hope that those scandalous days will sometime return. I'm sorry to say, but again, those are petrol generators, usually the smaller solutions. So. But yeah.
So should government continue to manage transmission?
I cannot say that they're incapable, right? This is a key national asset. I don't see the grid collapsing every day. I don't see a lot of fingers being pointed. I don't see as many fingers being pointed at distribution today as there were, let's say, 6 years ago at the time of the privatization. So I think some investment has gone in the last 6 years under the previous minister. These guys are doing their best to keep to keep the grid up and running. What happens is, one fault. It's kind of living on the edge, unfortunately. A lot of times in Lagos traffic, that one small thing on one junction can end up costing you an hour, and it's the same, unfortunately, with a power system like this. So one major transformer will blow in one part of the country, and it makes it hard to keep that system up. Because as soon as you lose one load center, you're now forced to be calling generating companies, produce less, because they're giving you more, and that power has to go somewhere, and there's nowhere to put it. And so all of a sudden, the whole system collapses. The same way, if one Genco were to go down, let's say Ughelli goes down for some reason, they have a fault in the plant, well, you just lost 300 megawatts from your system, and that means that your voltage, your voltage drops. You gotta immediately disconnect some customer loads to match it. So it's a hard job. We should give them as much support as we can, but we need to make sure that, again, the right investment goes in. So today, most of the power plants are in the southeast, south-south. There's a need to bring that power out from basically Enugu. There's something called New Haven Transmission Station. Bring that up to Makurdi and the northeast. Bring that up to Kaduna and the north central. These are major transmission projects that need to get done to enable them to do their job better. Otherwise, you end up with certain discos getting more power than they even are supposed to get, and other distribution companies are getting less, and it's just because of the state of the transmission infrastructure. But it is better than it was 6 years ago, but it needs to be sustained. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. It needs to go in every year into the transmission grid.
Go back to the questions. I have a question here again for you. Why are companies with requisite expertise and financial capacity like General Electric and others not invited to bid?
Yeah, General Electric and Siemens, they want to sell turbines, right? So if I take us back to the NIPP Gencos that Obasanjo were done during the Obasanjo administration. These were 10 power plants to deliver 4,500 megawatts of generation capability. Most of these turbines arrived in, let's say, 2004 or 2006. And they sat there. At the time of the privatization, 2013, I think only 2 of these plants, maybe 4 of the 10 plants were commissioned. I mean, it took more than a decade to commission most of those plants. Whereas GE and Siemens, they were paid 10 years earlier. They got paid for those turbines. Whether those turbines were installed, whether they generated anything. So, do they have a role to play? Yes, but they're generally not the one that's going to go and invest in the transmission and distribution infrastructure. They can to some degree, or they will say that they can, but their main business is selling those turbines. And today, 25% capacity utilization from our Gencos. Turbines are not the area where we need a lot of new investment.
One big challenge for gas producers is the regulated gas price, which does not yield positive NPVs. Why is the federal government slow to encourage market-determined prices?
Okay, I mean, that was the case years ago where they were selling at very low prices, but I think that changed again. They're selling at $2.60 per MMBTU to most of the big on-grid Gencos, and their challenge is just getting paid. If the discos can't pay NBET and NBET can't pay the Gencos, then the Gencos can't pay for the gas. So I don't think it's a price point issue as much anymore, as much as a payment challenge. There may be something to the payment challenge, but to the price point, but I don't think that's really the big issue anymore. They're also selling to the likes of GasLink, Falcon Gas, Shell, the guys running sort of regional gas pipeline networks. They're selling at over $7 per MMBTU. This is pipeline gas for something that did not have to be imported. That price is above what most countries are paying for gas that don't even have gas. So, they're able to sell to certain, regional gas networks, to industrial hubs at over $7, which is nearly 3 times what they're charging the on-grid Gencos. So I don't think there's as much of an issue. It's more around the exact price point. The issue is getting paid. That's really the big deterrent in developing gas for domestic use, is that you need to make sure that you get paid, and that goes back to the entire supply chain and making sure customers are happy and pay their bills. But I don't think we're setting a low domestic gas price the way we did, say, 7-8 years ago. I don't think that's the challenge anymore.
Of course, you're talking about we need extra investment in transmission and distribution. How much exactly do we need?
I know the transmission company's budget in the multi-year tariff order model that the regulator has is $300 million a year. That was the original figure for what transmission should be getting just from a regulator standpoint, where the transmission company says they need $1 billion a year. That's a figure that transmission usually puts out there. The distribution companies, and again, I don't necessarily have the figure. A lot of times you're talking billions of dollars of what they say they need, but I don't like to dwell on those huge figures, because when you try to do everything at once, you're going to fail. You've got to make sure this pocket of customers is happy and they have a power source that works. And then you got to make sure the next, we have to do a scalable approach, modular approach to this investment. But it's just a sustained approach. And Nigerians, generally, I can't say everyone, generalizations get us in trouble, but as a society, I think we tend to be a bit more optimistic. If we see that a papa is powered and we're sitting in Ijora, well, okay, my time will come. And then if we hear that, Festac is powered and you're sitting, so people, if you see the improvement happening, you just, okay, I know it's coming. So I don't think that we have to do everything at once. Those turbines, they did sit there for 10 years, basically, for the most part. They sat there. Some of them had to be sent back abroad to be rechecked, because a turbine is not meant to sit stationary for years. Think of a vehicle that sits in one place. The tires will have to be replaced from the vehicle. Things will work if it's stationary. So unfortunately, a lot of them did sit there. As we stand today, 9 of the 10 plants are now commissioned, but most of them are running at less than 25% of capacity, because everyone in the system is trying to prioritize the privatized GenCos. Those Obasanjo and IPP plants are still owned by government, and so they're just being run. I look at it to sort of make sure that they're alive and functional. If you didn't run them at all, we'd have to send the turbines out for repairs again. So, but yes, they sat for about 10 years in a lot of cases. 9 of the 10 are commissioned now. It's only the one in Imo State that isn't commissioned. But it wasn't really where our problem was at the time, was generation, and it's still not our problem today. So.
Thank you. What is the estimated size of the market, and what are the market entry problems to anticipate in Nigeria?
I think, so I was, a few weeks ago, I was at a conference of mini-grid regulators looking at, because one of the challenges, it's a new business model, it's a new market, so there needs to be some harmonization around the rules, some stabilization of the rules, some consistency looking into the future. My impression was that Nigeria is ahead of the game there. That the policies around mini-grids, rural mini-grids, are looking quite good. I think there's some optimism that that's going to be attracting investment. I think Nigeria and Ghana, Kenya to some extent. I think the barriers, the big one, it was mentioned, is tariffs. That's a big challenge. The market opportunity. The figures around unelectrified Nigeria, it varies. It's hard to know exactly. I think sometimes I see as high as 70% of the population is electrified, and then sometimes I see as low as 40% or something. So it's in probably in the high tens of millions at least of unelectrified, and so there's a big opportunity. I think renewables. I don't know how it goes here, but I know in South Africa, building a power plant, a fossil fuel, they do coal there because there's tons of coal. It's a mess. It's a nightmare. Renewables, you can throw them up really fast. So that has some advantages going for it. I think, when you're looking out in the rural areas, it's getting the transmission infrastructure out there. Again, that's one of the advantages of mini grid. You can kind of put it wherever you want. If you take 100 million people, and it's in the billions and billions of dollars, but I don't have the numbers on top of my head.
Are there opportunities in providing metering solutions, and does these heavy regulations apply to them?
So the regulator has gone through different modes of trying to encourage metering, right? So we usually use a figure of 50%, that basically half of Nigerian consumers are metered and half are not. That is perhaps an overestimate, because a lot of times we'll just do one bulk meter, and the 50 users off that meter are not in the system as 50 users, they're only in the system as one user. So that will typically mean there's one meter for one customer, 100% metering. When in reality, it's 1 meter for 50 customers, that's 2% metering. So the gap is actually large, and but they've come out with, the latest one is called MAP, it's a meter asset provider model, and they're basically the same way the central bank has lent into the power sector and kind of has a first line charge to be paid back from industry-wide collections. They want to have meter asset providers also be basically given senior rights to take that line from collections. And this is something that was a regulation that was passed last year, but I don't, and you'll read it in the papers a lot about maps, and they're going to do this area, they're going to do that area. I don't necessarily know how much progress they've made yet. Our preference generally is you attach that to the other CapEx, the capital expenditure that's required to improve service, right? The meter's only going to help with the billing situation, and my fear is that you'll spend a lot of money on metering, and you'll find out that, now why have the discos been reticent to meter? Some people will say it's because they don't have the funding, other people will say it's because they're overbilling, they like estimates, right? And I'm sorry to say, I think a lot of that is the latter part, that if you don't have a meter, you're probably being given an estimated bill that is in excess of what you should get. And that's not because the disco is a thief, right? The system, the regulator is not going to allow them to bill more units on aggregate than what they received from the grid. So it means other customers are stealing from them. Those might be people that have existing meters, whether it's postpaid or prepaid, but they've bypassed a lot of the equipment in their house. So their meter reading comes out very low. And so for all the people who have actually tampered with their meters, who have bypassed any illegal connections, the disco now has to bill somebody for that. So he's putting that on the estimated guys. Well, that's the reality. So that means that when he goes and meters these guys, it's going to expose his gap. He's got to go and find all the thieves, or else he's going to have a shortfall now. So we're investing in a meter, but we actually need to improve overall commercial services, find those customers who are actually consuming more than what they receive a bill for. That's a management issue, and then I'd like the meters to be attached to transformers and cables and things that will improve service to those areas, because it's not enough to just have the meter. But it is there. You can register as a MAP with the regulator, and you can sign an agreement with the distribution company, and the key is trying to get a right to those cash flows to say, I need to know that irregardless of how the distribution company runs his business, I will be paid back for the meters that I've provided.
The last question goes to Alex, and this is on the off-grid power solutions. And the question is, since the off-grid power solutions you provide is temporary, what happens in the long run when the landlord needs the land for development?
So we deliver, it's over a small area, so it's either 24 volt or actually 48 volt DC. So it's a big difference from traditional power. So we're delivering really primary energy, and because it's cheaper to do that kind of distribution than full-scale 220 volt. But that also means that can't be reused when if the grid comes, it will need to be completely replaced. That's a decision that we've made because we feel that it's going to be a while before, so we're trying to move into areas where we're trying to mitigate our risk, and so we want to be in areas where we think it's going to be a while before the main grid comes. But we've made that decision that it's better to provide something more affordable now that people can pay for, and there's a lot of that can be reused in different settings, but then they'll have to come in with other infrastructure. The advantages of doing 24-volt DC distribution, it's odd. We're trying to do 48's a little bit more normal, but in a sense. It's in these informal settlements, it's safer, it's cheaper, and it actually prevents quite a bit of tampering, because when you tap it, so we have prepaid meters, so everybody's billed. We have an online platform for doing all the prepaid billing, but if you tap that line, one, you're not going to kill yourself, which is good, and two, unless you really know what you're doing, you can't really use it. You can't just hook a plug point up to it and start, pulling power down. But yeah, that's a decision that we've made, that we think works for the context that we're in. When you have these dense urban settlements, I think in rural areas or less where the distances between houses, it won't make any sense. You need the higher voltage.
Why is the federal government of Nigeria approval process bureaucratic? Are investors not welcome to this space?
Yeah, again, you're dealing with companies that are already struggling. So Nigerian banks lent $2.5 billion to investors in the privatization. That doesn't include the Egbin plant, which was sold separately, so that would bring the total to $3 billion. So any investor coming in, what does he want? He either wants a guarantee from government that he'll be paid for his investment, right? Or he wants rights to the cash flows of the end customers, so just give me those customers. Neither of those models is really that tenable. If we were to guarantee payment to the investors, we're going to bankrupt the nation, right? So we can't be paying out on guarantees because the system is unable to take the 70% offtake of your power plant that we need to. So you end up paying for, the government through the taxpayers, we would end up paying for power that we're not receiving. And that's not really a tenable model. So the other model everyone has to look at is, okay, I need the end customers. Well, the distribution company and NBET as a buyer of power, they don't want to see those customers leave the system. So there has to be a collaborative approach. And that's what franchising is meant to do. So it's not that government doesn't want the investors to come. It's just that it's difficult to meet the needs on day one. The investor expects to find, 53 countries in Africa, maybe 54 now with South Sudan. There are other places for the investor to go, right? And Nigeria is not the only place. So when you come into Nigeria and you find out that you can't get the government to guarantee you payment, and you can't get an easy access to just take customers that are underserved, let me go to Ghana, let me go to Cote d'Ivoire, let me go to Zambia. That's what the average investor will do. It's not that they're not welcome, it's just that there's a bit more structuring and creativity that has to be put into it. Otherwise, we have to have a reset of the power space so that $3 billion in debts is not something that we're all worried about. We're worried about this power problem becoming a banking crisis where they have to write off these loans and suddenly we have to bail out banks. So, they're trying to contain the problem. It can be solved, but it's going to be mainly local solutions. People who really understand, how this works, working with the distribution company, working with MDAT, basically saying, this is your share, this is my share, this is, you have to figure out a way to allow the investor to make his return, and then any excess profit can still go to the distribution company and his bankers and MDAT for their services. It can't all be for just the investor.
Thank you very much. A round of applause, please. Thank you for all the speakers. Thank you for your time. Thank you.